So a marketing person might see it differently than an engineer. That's okay. They still have something in common to talk about. And you're not talking over each other or past each other. You're talking about that job map. So I find that jobs to be done, it occupies somewhat of a neutral ground. In other words, we don't bring our functional perspective to the argument and are arguing from a sales perspective or arguing from a marketing perspective. It makes kind of a neutral, kind of a Switzerland kind of place where we all can go and just say, okay, let's leave that all aside. We're going to talk about the customer now. And everybody feels comfortable because there's always something in there that is relevant to their function.
Welcome to the Product People podcast, where we learn from amazing product leaders about product management, growth, and product ops. I'm today's host, Mirela Mus, founder and CPO at Product People. Today's guest is Jim Kalbach, Chief Evangelist at Mural, a visual work platform. He wrote 2 books, The Jobs to be Done Playbook and Mapping Experiences. This is the first part of the episode with our guest. Welcome, Jim. Happy to have you here.
So I'm Jim Kalbach. I'm the Chief Evangelist at Mural, one of the leading online whiteboards. I've been in design and innovation for over 20 years. So I've worked in product teams as a designer and innovation teams. And I got in contact with Jobs to be Done about 20 years ago, actually. But most recently, in 2020, I wrote the book called The Jobs to be Done Playbook. Prior to that, I had been doing some workshops and education around the topic, and I continue to do that as well. We have a website, The Jobs to be Done Toolkit. That's jtbdtoolkit.com. And there's some free downloads and resources there as well, too. So I've been working with Jobs to be Done for a while, and I'm the author of one of the more popular books on the topic.
Amazing and super impressive that you still have time to contribute to the community and to knowledge sharing while being the Chief Evangelist at Mural. And so how would you explain Jobs to be Done to a young child or a golden retriever?
Just to use some of the simplest terms that I can think of to answer your question. If you are trying to create a product that you want other people to use, you have the problem of guessing what they actually need. And what Jobs to be Done does is it helps you predict or to guess why somebody might use your product over another one.
And then if you want to give your usual definition of Jobs to be Done, feel free to also do so.
Okay. I see Jobs to be Done as an innovation framework. I think it helps not only product teams, but also marketing and sales. I talk to lots of different types of teams across the organization. It's an innovation framework that provides a common language for understanding market needs. So, as I said in my previous answer, innovators have the distinct problem of trying to predict adoption. Why will somebody choose my product or solution over another one? And the Jobs to be Done theory, there is a theory behind it, which basically says if we understand the person's job that they're trying to get done, what they're trying to accomplish and what their needs are, we can increase our chance of innovation success. There's no guarantee, but we can increase the chance of that success. And that's what Jobs to be Done does. It provides a language and a framework for understanding problems without talking about solutions or technology. So one of the big tenets of Jobs to be Done is to expunge technology and solutions from our language. So we're just talking in human terms. You can think of it also as kind of a customer discovery technique, right? I refer to it very often as research, but it's a customer discovery technique so that you can understand the problem before you start creating the solution.
I've also personally used it at a few clients where the areas where it worked very well for me was B2B companies that had a very strong sales presence due to historical facts or how the market ran. And sales needed to be our allies in that case. I know there's all these things, it's like, sales is pushing me to do that. But in some cases, you actually need to collaborate with them and get their buy-in, and that's how the company works. And the Jobs to be Done framework really helped me get them on board and help the process of some buy versus build decision in the product areas where they were covering. This was a large B2B logistics company covering the hospitality sector, mostly restaurants and cafes, and they would have tooling and services for everything that happens behind the counter, from planning to delivering fresh supplies, And that was pretty hard to narrow down, especially for people who are not super used to digital products and understanding overlaps in some of their portfolio solutions. And I was surprised how well this worked. It ended up being presented in a board meeting. I was using Miro, not Mural, but for the same effect of mapping these jobs for their audience. And people really got it, which surprised me because that company had been struggling to do agile or any other things that are popular at this moment. Like we're not even trying to discuss OKRs or anything there.
Yeah, well, one thing that I heard you say, or at least when I heard you talking there and describing that situation, which I think is common, I heard a need for a mindset shift. So salespeople are thinking, what can I sell? And that's why we hire them, so they can sell things. Product people are thinking, what can I build? Right. What Jobs to be Done does is it flips the script and it says it doesn't matter what you can build and it doesn't matter what you can sell first. The first thing you should think about is what do people need? And it actually flips the conversation around. So you're not starting from a product point of view or a sales point of view and then arguing and trying to harmonize those point of views. You immediately flip the script and say, what's the job to be done, which is another way of saying what's the need. And then you have a conversation from that standpoint, and then you work backwards towards the technology or the sales motion, right? So it's about starting with the need and working back towards the solution, not the other way around. And Jobs to be Done provides us a common language for doing that so that you're not arguing from a sales perspective or a product perspective. You're arguing from the customer perspective, right? First. And what that does is it finds a lot of common ground between different teams, between design, engineering, and product, but also between product and marketing and product and sales as well, too. That anytime you go into those conversations, you can say, wait, what's the job to be done here? Let's start talking about that and then work back towards the quote unquote argument that needs to happen there. So the point I want to make there is that what Jobs to be Done does is it brings a mindset shift with it, that we need to shift away from our own immediate purview and we shift it and we start the conversation from the individual standpoint, from the human standpoint, and then work back into the conversation from there.
I agree that it helped cross silos
Right.
and find a common language. And I was positively surprised how well it worked compared to all the history I have heard at some clients or other things that have failed. You said that you've heard from people that they call the methodology fluffy, whereas I said that I found it that it gets to the point very well. What would you say are the most common pitfalls you've noticed people fall into when they try to apply job to be done?
Yeah, I think there are two things that come to mind right away. There's probably some other pitfalls, but at a high level, I think the first is adopting that mindset shift that I talked about. And the Jobs to be Done framework, at least the one that I wrote about and that I teach, expunges any reference to technology solutions or methods. So what the framework does is tries to understand the human needs that we're trying to serve for, but not through the lens of our own product or brand, right? You're not talking about features or a workflow of using software. You're not talking about your price point. You're not talking about your brand. And the framework that I use actually very carefully and precisely expunges all of that reference from the language so that you're not talking about yourself first, you're talking about the individual, and then you work back into the conversation. It sounds easy in theory, but in practice, it's actually harder to do because we're soaking in our own solutions. We're soaking in our own brands all day long. And it's hard to not talk about a screen or a button. It's hard to not talk about a price point. But that's what the framework forces us to do. And that's, part of my teaching. We go over that. It takes practice to actually have that mindset shift by not referring to technology or solutions. The other problem that Jobs to be Done brings with it is anytime you're talking about human needs and goals, there's an abstraction hierarchy that comes with it, right? I might have a small goal here, and then you can say, well, why are you doing that? Well, because I want to achieve a larger goal. Well, why are you doing that? Because I want to achieve a larger goal. For instance, let me just give you a concrete example. In Jobs to be Done, we like to point to the work of Theodore Levitt, who was a famous Harvard business professor. And he used to like to say, people don't want a drill, they want a hole in the wall. You might
Yeah,
have heard of
that
that. before. Yeah. But then you could say, okay, they don't want a hole in the wall. They want to hang a picture. And you say, okay, they don't want to hang a picture. They want to redecorate their home. Okay. Well, why do they want to redecorate their home? Is because they want to have a better home life and they want to preserve family memories. Now, if you're a drill bit manufacturer, let's say you manufacture, not even drills, you manufacture drill bits. Starting with having a better home life or preserving family memories, that's not a good starting point for innovation. It always ends with love, happiness, or self-actualization. If you just keep asking why, right? That's not a good starting point for innovation.
You end up with a Vodafone or any telco commercial, which
Well,
is just like some people laughing in a field of
right.
flowers.
It's good for marketing. It's good for marketing. It's not good for innovation because if you manufacture drill bits and you go into an innovation brainstorming session and you write, right, we want to help people be happier in their lives. It's like, dude, we manufacture drill bits. Let's bring it down to earth, right? So one that I teach is about getting the right level of abstraction and not starting too high or too small. But what you need to find is what I call the target job. In Jobs to be done framework, you frame everything around a target job. And in this case, it could be drilling a hole in the wall, but it's probably more around the size of renovating a home or renovating a room or something like that. And I would say, okay, if that's the target job, let's understand the process of getting that done. Let's understand the emotions that are involved. Let's understand the outcomes. Let's understand the factors that make a difference in getting that jobs done.
I really like how you've separated the emotional aspect.
Yeah.
I remember, at least my understanding when I was reading Clayton Christensen, he had the emotional job as also a regular job. For example, why are you hiring the Instagram feed?
Right.
Because I'm bored or because I have some anxiety. And I like that you've also take that into account, but it's not the only thing that is happening over there. And that you're also separating the aspirational part so that you're aware about it, but don't go at that high altitude if it's not necessary or helpful.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm glad you noticed that because that was exactly the thinking behind, we just relaunched a Jobs to be done canvas. I call it the Jobs to be done canvas 2.0. And like other canvases that we know, like the business model canvas, basically has 8 different categories. And those are the types of information that you're looking for. The job performer, who's performing the job, the target job. But once you define that target job, there are essentially 4 categories of information that you're looking for. You're looking for the steps. What's the process? You're looking for the outcomes. What are the measures of success? You're looking for the differentiators, those factors, but also emotional and social aspects as well, too, play a role. So what the Jobs to be done framework is, it's basically a big filter that if you go out and talk to your market, just talk to people or watch them in your marketplace, trying to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. The question that you have is, if I'm not viewing them through the lens of my own product or my solution, how do I diagnose? How do I understand what their needs are? And what Jobs to be done does is it gives you a filter, right? You can throw that all into the filter and it all comes out into different buckets and everything's nice and neatly categorized, which allows you to then prioritize things. What's the biggest unmet emotion or what's the most important emotion that people have? What's the biggest outcome that they're seeking that they find difficult to achieve? What's the hardest step to get done? So once you have all those things categorized, you can then prioritize those and go into product planning and brainstorming and even road mapping with a lot more confidence that the problem that we're solving actually has validity and it has basis in what we saw in the marketplace.
Hey, if you're enjoying this Product People podcast, check out our weekly live streams on LinkedIn and YouTube. Back to the episode.
So, what was the initial feedback you've gotten when you put out JTBD Canvas 2.0?
I think it's very positive. It continues to be our biggest download. We have a free download on the site, jtbdtoolkit.com. It's a free download. As other canvases are out positioned in the world, it's really about a conversation. You can use the theory, the techniques that I just described, but what you want to do is you want to bring your team into that conversation. And that's why we use canvases, right? Because you can put it up on a digital whiteboard or a real whiteboard and use sticky notes and have a conversation around where do we want to innovate? What's the problem that we're trying to solve? And you can actually bring people in to the conversation. So I also see Jobs to be done, and this is where I differ from some of the other thought leaders out there. I see Jobs to be done as a collaboration tool. It's not just a scientific, technique and method where I can identify unmet needs. that's all good. And I'm not saying don't do that, but I think we can use jobs to be done also as ways to bring people into the conversation. And that's why we made the canvas, was to make it a conversational tool. And I think that's what is attracting people to it. So far, the feedback has been very positive around it.
So I will double down on what you said earlier, it being a collaboration tool. So what's your take on cross-functional collaboration? So I would see a PM doing this
Mm.
with their development team or with their closest stakeholders. But what about teams that have lots of stakeholders, a lot of domains? How have you seen this work for cross-functional communication?
I mean, much in the same way that we described earlier in the conversation, is that I found that regardless of your perspective, like if you work in marketing or you work in the content, wherever you work, you should always be able to find yourself in the jobs to be done framework or find your own work there. Let's just take, for an example, a job map. And a job map is a chronological sequence of the steps to get the target job done. Once you have that chronological sequence of steps, regardless of what department or function that you're in, you can understand that from the individual standpoint and try to understand how that affects your work. So a marketing person might see it differently than an engineer. That's okay. They still have something in common to talk about. And you're not talking over each other or past each other. You're talking about that job map. So I find that jobs to be done, it occupies somewhat of a neutral ground. In other words, we don't bring our functional perspective to the argument and, are arguing from a sales perspective or arguing from a marketing perspective. It makes kind of a neutral, kind of a Switzerland kind of place where we all can go and just say, okay, let's leave that all aside. We're going to talk about the customer now. And everybody feels comfortable because there's always something in there that is relevant to their function.
And how would you advise a PM who wants to do this in a larger organization with many cross-functional stakeholders? How should they approach this? Are they using the same board where they collate the canvas? Or should they do this with individual groups and then try to merge it out before going and interviewing the job performers?
I think up front, so I have a 5-stage process that I'm working on. It's not in the book that I just wrote. This is going to be in the follow-up materials. I have this 5-stage process. The first step is scoping your jobs to be done landscape. In particular, you have to decide on a target job. That's kind of a strategic decision, right? Because if you're going to go out and innovate around a specific job to be done, you need to have somewhat of buy-in across the organization that's the most relevant area for you to focus on. And I think that needs a broader conversation. So I think at the very beginning of this 5-stage process that I just talked about, for a PM, I think they would want to bring in as many different people around the organization as possible. It's only a 45-minute conversation that you have to have using the canvas. You basically have to decide on the job performer and target job. There's a couple of other exercises around that. But I think doing that in a bigger group up front, so you get everybody nodding, is good. I think later on in the process, while you're doing research or while you're creating a job map, there you might want to have different conversations depending on what the project is or what you're trying to do. If you're trying to develop, on top of an existing product versus launching a new one, for instance, you might have different conversations, but those could be smaller in nature, like you said. So bring everybody in up front, get alignment there. And then from there on, you can bring in different groups and do more of a workshop type exercises with them.
So align strategically on the target job, then you can be a bit more generous on the related jobs because those won't be researched that attentively. And this probably helps also collate multiple opinions from people. And after you have that, you would go and interview. Your recommendation is 8 to 12 people. That would be the job performers.
Yeah, that's correct. So jobs to be done starts with qualitative research, and you really have to get out of the building. I mean, there's no way around it, and actually talk to people. Interestingly enough, I can help a lot with jobs to be done, and I'm an advocate and proponent of using AI. So for instance, if we decide on a target job, you can actually, with a big prompt, you need to know how to make the prompt, where you can go to ChatGPT and ask it to try to create a job map for you, for instance, which is one of the first things that I like to do after you do research is create a job map. You can actually have ChatGPT try to do that for you before you go out and talk to those 8 or 12 customers, so that when you go out, you're a more informed researcher, particularly if you're working in areas that are unfamiliar to you. I did a project once where I was working with compliance officers for mines in South Africa. I don't know anything about mines. I don't know anything. Well, I don't know what their jobs to be done are, but I actually used it as an example in ChatGPT, and it gave me an idea of what their jobs to be done are, right? So then I go out into the field and I'm a much more informed researcher. But the point is that jobs to be done begins with qualitative research, whether you use AI or not. After that, though, you can start to quantify things. So the outcomes, for instance, you can say, okay, I found 50 outcomes for this target job. Which ones are represent the biggest unmet needs? And then you can do that via survey with hundreds of people if you need a quantitative sample as well, too. So jobs to be done, mix of qualitative and quantitative research.
This was the first part of the episode with our guest. Be sure to check out the second part. If you found it useful, please subscribe and consider giving us a rating. For more info, visit getproductpeople.com and see you next time.